The sun was bleeding out over Red Mesa Canyon when the cry cut through the wind, sharp enough to halt Wes Hart's horse mid-stride. He froze in the saddle, scanning the red-gold ridges that towered on either side. The canyon swallowed sound. You could ride for hours here and hear nothing but your own heartbeat, until now. His hand drifted to the worn butt of his Colt, thumb brushing the smooth metal. Another cry, faint but sharp, rode the wind from somewhere ahead. Wes nudged his gelding forward, keeping to the shadow of a mesquite grove. He'd learned the hard way not to ride blind toward trouble. The air was thick with the scent of dust and sage. Grit hissed under the horse's hooves. Up ahead, a jagged ridge split the trail. The cry came again, shorter this time, almost a gasp. He dismounted, boots sinking into powder-fine dirt, and led the horse toward the sound. A sliver of movement flickered between the mesquite trunks. A figure half collapsed against the base of a tree. She was small but upright, one arm trembling as it held a bow. The arrow's head glinted in the dying light, aimed squarely at his chest. "Don't move," she said, voice low but edged with steel. Wes stopped, palms open at his sides. Her eyes, dark, fierce, locked on his, and in them he saw both fear and a refusal to yield. The last slant of sunlight lit the high bones of her face, the sheen of sweat on her temple. Her hair, black as obsidian, stuck to her cheek where the wind had pressed it. "You're hurt," Wes said evenly. "Stay back." The bowstring quivered under the strain of her grip. He took in the torn hem of her skirt, the dark stain spreading along her calf, the awkward angle of one boot. She was a long way from any homestead. Apache by her dress and the leather pouch tied tight at her hip. The wind shifted, carrying a tang of blood beneath the sage. He could walk away. He'd done it before, when trouble came dressed in someone else's skin. But as he stood there, the words his mother had spoken years ago rose unbidden. "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." Hebrews 13:2. Wes slowly unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop in the dust. The woman's eyes narrowed, but she didn't lower the bow. "I've got water," he said, reaching for the canteen tied to his saddle horn. He tossed it underhand toward her, letting it land halfway. She glanced at it, then back at him, measuring. Her breathing hitched, pain, not fear. The bow wavered. He took one step, then another, closing the distance until he could see the tightness at the corners of her mouth, the pale strain in her jaw. "Name's Wes Hart," he said quietly. "I'm not here to harm you." Her reply was a small shake of the head. She tried to rise, and her leg buckled. The bow slipped from her hand, falling soundless into the dust. In 2 strides Wes was beside her, one arm slipping under her knees, the other bracing her back. She stiffened at the sudden contact, then sagged against him as her strength gave out. Her weight was light, but the heat of fever clung to her skin. The gelding snorted as Wes lifted her into the saddle. He swung up behind her, one arm holding her steady. The canyon wind was cooling fast, and shadows climbed the cliffs like rising water. Somewhere beyond those ridges, trouble was moving. He could feel it in the taut silence. By the time they cleared the grove, the first star was burning above the rim. He turned the gelding toward the distant glow of his cabin lantern. In his gut, Wes knew he'd crossed a line he'd sworn to hold since the fire took his family, and there'd be no turning back now. The lantern on Wes Hart's porch threw a warm circle of light against the darkening canyon. He swung down from the saddle, careful not to jar the woman in his arms. The gelding's breath steamed in the cooling air as Wes pushed the cabin door open with his shoulder. Inside, the scent of lamp oil and weathered pine greeted him. The room was small, just one main space, a kitchen corner, and the old stone hearth that had been cold too many nights. Dust motes hung in the lamplight, stirring when he stepped in. On the mantel, a pair of framed photographs kept their silent vigil. A smiling woman with her hand resting on the head of a fair-haired boy. Wes's throat tightened, but he turned away before the memories could bite. He laid the woman gently on the long settee near the fire, the faded fabric worn smooth by years of use. "Stay still," he said, setting his hat aside. She watched him warily as he fetched a basin, filled it with water from the hand pump, and stoked the fire until the logs caught with a dry crackle. The light painted her features in gold and shadow, high cheekbones, eyes still alert despite the strain. "What's your name?" he asked. Silence. Her gaze flicked toward the door, as if measuring her chances of making it back outside. "I'm not keeping you here against your will," he said, "but that leg won't take you far tonight." She said something in a language he didn't know, then switched to halting English. "Asha Altaha." He nodded. "All right, Asha, let's see that wound." Her skirt was torn high enough to reveal a jagged gash along her calf, crusted with dirt and dried blood. He poured water over the injury, the grime swirling away into the basin, and she winced but didn't pull back. The cut wasn't deep enough for stitches, but it would need cleaning. He bound it with a strip of clean linen, winding the cloth snug but not tight. "You've done this before," she said, her voice low. "Once or twice." When he reached for her ankle, she tensed. The joint was swollen, the boot strained against it. He loosened the laces, easing the leather off. She drew a sharp breath but made no sound beyond that. "You'll need to stay off it for a few days," he told her. "I won't be here that long," she replied quickly. Wes didn't answer. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, one for her, and set it on the low table. She hesitated, then took it, cradling the mug in both hands. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the pop of the fire and the faint creak of the rocking chair by the window, moving in the draft. Wes found himself watching her more than he should. The way her eyes softened when they landed on the flames, the way her shoulders eased as the warmth reached her. On the table beside her, a small leather pouch rested near her elbow. It was stitched with careful, even hands, the kind of work meant to last. When his gaze lingered on it, she drew it into her lap, fingers tightening around it. "Something important?" he asked. Her eyes snapped up to meet his. "Yes." The single word was heavy enough to close the subject. He let it be. Everyone had their own reasons for guarding what was theirs. Later, when she had drifted into a restless sleep, Wes stepped outside. The canyon lay quiet under a moon that washed the ridges in silver. He leaned against the porch post, the night wind cool on his face, and looked up at the scatter of stars. Under his breath, he spoke words that had carried him through darker nights. "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." Psalm 91:1. Behind him, the fire crackled, and inside his cabin, for the first time in years, there was someone else breathing in the dark. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. The first light of day spilled pale gold across Red Mesa, turning the canyon walls into glowing embers. Wes stepped outside, mug of coffee in hand, and found Asha crouched near the fence line. Her dark hair was loose, falling over her shoulder as she sifted through a patch of low-growing plants. "You're up early," he said, voice still rough from sleep. She glanced over, then gestured for him to join her. In her palm lay a sprig of green leaves, each oval and veined like the inside of a feather. "Yerba buena," she said. "Good for pain. Boil the leaves, drink the tea." Wes crouched beside her, the morning air cool enough to raise goose flesh on his forearms. "I've seen it before, never knew it was useful." She looked up at him, the corners of her mouth softening just enough to hint at a smile. "Out here, everything is useful, if you know what to look for." They moved along the fence, Asha pointing out other plants, desert lavender for calming the mind, creosote for cleaning wounds. Wes listened, storing the knowledge away. He'd lived on this land for years, yet in a few minutes she'd shown him it still had secrets. When they circled back to the porch, Wes fetched a worn leather saddle from the wall. The stitching along one stirrup strap had come loose. "Your saddle's going to give you trouble if you ride it like this," he said, setting it on the rail. Asha stepped closer, running her fingers over the cracked leather. "It was my father's. I keep it because it fits me, not because it's pretty." Wes didn't comment, just reached for a needle and heavy thread. "Sit, I'll fix it." She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the porch step, watching as his calloused hands worked with surprising precision. The morning stayed quiet, except for the soft scrape of the awl and the occasional whistle of a meadowlark somewhere in the mesquite. By the time the saddle was mended, the sun had risen high enough to warm the dust at their feet. Wes lifted it to the railing. "There.
Won't come apart on you now." Asha's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she nodded. "Thank you." They spent the rest of the morning at the well. Wes drew water, the rope creaking under the bucket's weight, while Asha rinsed the leaves she'd gathered. When the buckets were full, they carried them to the small garden plot behind the cabin, where the earth had been coaxed into life despite the hard desert soil. Afterward, they turned to the north fence, where a section had sagged under last winter's winds. Wes showed Asha how to brace a post with a length of cedar. She caught on quickly, steadying the rail while he hammered the nails in. Dust clung to her skirt, and the smell of sun-warmed wood rose around them. "You work like someone who's done this before," Wes said. "Where I grew up, everyone built. Homes, fences, fires, it's all the same. You do it together or it doesn't get done." Wes met her eyes briefly, then looked away toward the line of cliffs. He'd forgotten what it was like to work alongside someone without the weight of suspicion between them. By midday, they'd finished the repairs. Wes leaned on the fence post, wiping sweat from his brow.
Asha was beside him, hair loosened from its braid, a streak of dust across her cheek. "You've earned your keep," he said. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I'm not here to earn anything, Wes Hart, but I am here." It wasn't quite a truce, but it was closer than they'd been the night before. And as the sun climbed higher over Red Mesa, Wes realized he didn't mind the sound of another set of footsteps beside his. By late afternoon, the sun had baked the yard into a hard crust, and Wes was in the barn oiling the hinges on the stall doors when he heard the sound of hooves on the hardpan. He stepped to the doorway, squinting into the glare. A lone rider was coming up the trail, stocky, with a bowler hat pulled low and a dust-stained duster flapping behind him. Wes recognized the gait of the chestnut gelding before he saw the man's face. Jed Merritt. Wes stepped out into the yard, wiping his hands on a rag. "Jed, didn't expect you out this way." Jed swung down stiffly, glancing toward the cabin before answering. "Had business in town, thought I'd check on an old friend." His gaze lingered on the porch, where Asha's saddle sat drying in the sun. "Place looks the same," Jed said, but his tone carried something heavier. "Heard some talk in Red Mesa." Wes kept his face neutral. There's always talk in Red Mesa. Jed shifted his weight, thumb hooked under his gun belt. "This talk's about you, about who you've got staying here." Wes let the silence stretch. "They say she's Apache," Jed went on, "that she's trouble. Folks don't like seeing one of theirs mixing in with, well, you know how it is." Wes's jaw tightened. "I know exactly how it is." Jed took off his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "I'm just saying, Wes, people remember Abilene. Remember the kind of mess you can get tangled in. If you're not careful, you'll have more than just talk coming your way." Wes stepped closer, his voice steady but edged. "This is my land. What happens on it is my say. And if someone needs shelter, they get it. Doesn't matter where they're from." Jed studied him for a long moment. "You always were stubborn. Some things are worth being stubborn about." Jed put his hat back on. "Fine, but watch yourself.
This country's got a long memory, and it doesn't forget who it's decided is the enemy. He mounted up, turning the chestnut toward the trail. I'll be seeing you, Wes. Wes watched him ride off until the dust swallowed him. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement near the porch. Asha stood just inside the doorway, one hand resting on the frame. You heard, Wes said. She nodded. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was low. He's not wrong about the way they see me. They can see you however they want, Wes replied. I know what I see. Her gaze searched his face, as if testing the weight of his words. After a moment, she stepped back inside without another word. Wes stayed in the yard a little longer, letting the sound of Jed's warning fade into the wind. He'd meant what he said, but he knew words alone wouldn't keep trouble from finding them. And now it was closer than before. Evening shadows stretched long across the yard when Wes spotted a figure slipping between the mesquite at the edge of his property. His hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning by the door, but then he caught the easy, loping stride and recognized him. Ben Nanton.
Wes stepped down from the porch. You could have come up the trail like a regular visitor, he called. Ben's mouth twitched in something close to a smile. And let half the town see I was here? No, thank you. They clasped forearms briefly. Ben was lean, sun-darkened, his black hair bound back with a strip of leather. He glanced toward the cabin, where a faint light flickered in the window. She's here, then. Asha's here, Wes confirmed. Ben's gaze sharpened. You know why she's running? I know she's hurt and needed help. That's part of it, Ben said quietly. He took a step closer. There's a man, calls himself a miner, but he's nothing but a claim jumper and a thief. Been sniffing after Apache land for years. Word is, he's heard there's a map to somewhere sacred. Wes's eyes narrowed. And you're telling me Asha's got it? Ben didn't answer right away. Let's just say she's one of the few who could lead someone there. Whether she carries it in her hand or in her head doesn't matter to him. A flicker of movement drew Wes's attention. Asha had stepped out onto the porch, silent as the falling dusk. It's Gideon Pike, isn't it? She said. Ben inclined his head. You know him. I know the kind of man he is. Her voice was flat, but her hands were clenched at her sides. If he's on my trail, I should go, before he finds this place. Wes shook his head. If you go, you're alone, and if Pike's hunting you, that's the last thing you should be. I won't bring trouble to your door, she insisted. Too late, Wes said. His tone wasn't unkind, but it left no room for argument. Ben looked between them. Pike's been seen in Dry Creek. That's less than a day's ride from here. He's got men with him. The last of the light bled out of the canyon, leaving only the glow from the cabin windows. Wes could feel the air tightening, the way it did before a storm. You'll stay, he told Asha. She met his gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then she turned and went back inside, the door closing softly behind her. Ben watched her go. You're taking a risk, Wes. Wes glanced toward the dark ridge where the mesquite swayed in the night wind. I've taken worse. But as Ben melted back into the shadows, Wes knew this was different. The danger wasn't just coming, it was already here. The next day passed without visitors, the air holding that brittle stillness that came before a change in the weather. Wes took advantage of it, mending a split rail by the barn, while Asha worked near the garden, sorting the herbs she'd dried on the porch. By midday, the scent of simmering beans and roasted corn drifted from the cabin. When Wes stepped inside, Asha was at the hearth, turning a skillet over the flames. She didn't look up. You cook like someone who's done it for 100 mouths, he said, hanging his hat by the door. Sometimes it was close to that, she replied. Family, neighbors, people passing through. If you had food, you shared it. They ate at the small table by the window, sunlight spilling across the worn planks. The beans were seasoned with something Wes couldn't place, a sharp, earthy note that made the familiar taste new. "What is that?" he asked. "Mesquite pod. My mother ground it with cornmeal when there wasn't enough flour." She gave a small shrug. "Out here, you use what the land gives you." After the meal, Wes brought out an old harmonica from a drawer. "Hasn't been played in a while," he said, thumbing the tarnished metal. "Do you?" she asked. He blew a few soft notes, the sound low and wavering. "My boy liked it. Made him laugh when I missed a tune." His eyes drifted to the mantel where the photographs sat. "The night the fire took them, I swore I wouldn't touch it again." The silence stretched between them. Asha didn't press, just reached for a small bundle she'd kept tucked in her bag. She unwrapped it to reveal a strand of beads and a scrap of faded cloth, the edges worn to threads. "My mother sang when she worked," she said, running a finger along the beads. "There's a song she taught me about the mountains east of here, sacred ground. It tells where the water hides, even in dry years." Her gaze met his. "It's not just a place. It's who we are. That's why men like Pike can't be allowed to take it." Wes nodded slowly. "And that's why you ran." "That's why I run," she corrected. "Every time I stop, they get closer." The wind shifted outside, rattling the shutters. Wes leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You know, folks think forgiveness means forgetting. It doesn't." His voice had that low, deliberate weight it took on when he spoke from experience. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the memory, but it heals the burn." Asha studied him for a long moment, the firelight catching in her eyes. Then she gathered the beads back into the cloth, folding them with care. "Maybe," she said, "but some burns never stop aching." Wes didn't argue. He knew the truth of that as well as she did. Outside, the last light was fading from the canyon walls. The air carried the scent of mesquite smoke and something else, an unspoken understanding that, for now, neither of them was standing alone. The wind came in sharp from the north that morning, carrying with it a faint smell of rain that never seemed to fall. Wes was making a slow circuit of the property when something caught his eye near the north fence, a set of boot prints pressed into the dust. He crouched, brushing a hand along the edge of one. Deep, clean tread, not the worn soles of a rancher's work boots. The stride was long and deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't here by accident. A faint scuff mark led off toward the ridge, where the mesquite grew thick. Wes followed a few paces, noting how the tracks disappeared into rock. A man who knew how to cover his trail. When he returned to the cabin, Asha was sorting dried herbs into small bundles. She glanced up at his face before he spoke. "You found something." "Boot prints," Wes said. "North fence. Heavy, clean soles. Not mine, not a ranch hand's." Her hand stilled over the twine she was tying. "They're here, then." "Maybe scouting, maybe just passing through." She shook her head. "Men like Pike don't pass through. They circle until they see what they want." Wes leaned against the porch rail. "I'll oil the rifle." "That won't be enough," she replied. She set the herbs aside and stood, her limp less pronounced now. "We can set mesquite thorn traps along the fence line. They'll tear through leather boots before a man takes 2 steps." He considered her for a moment. "You've done this before." "My brothers taught me. We used them to keep coyotes out of the goat pens." They spent the afternoon gathering the long curved thorns from low branches, their tips sharp as needles. Asha worked quickly, her fingers weaving the thorns into loops of rawhide that could be staked flat against the ground. Wes cut and sharpened stakes for the alarm lines, thin wire strung between posts with empty cans that would rattle in the wind but scream like a warning when tripped. By the time the sun slipped low, they'd ringed the north fence with hidden teeth. The mesquite's shadow stretched over the traps, hiding them from anyone approaching after dark.
They walked the line together one last time, testing each alarm and checking the placement of every loop. No words passed between them. The work was enough. The air smelled of cut wood and the faint iron tang from where the thorns had pricked their fingers. When they reached the end of the line, Asha straightened and looked toward the ridge, her expression unreadable. "They'll come from that way," she said quietly. Wes followed her gaze. The rocks there formed a natural funnel, perfect for herding cattle or trapping men. "Then that's where we'll be ready." They turned back toward the cabin, walking side by side in the deepening dusk. The wind rattled the cans on the fence, and for a moment it almost sounded like a promise between them, silent but binding all the same. The night passed without alarm, but the wind carried a strange tension, as if the canyon itself was listening. By mid-morning, a soft whistle cut through the air from the tree line. Wes's head lifted. Only one man whistled like that. Ben Nanton stepped out of the brush, his eyes sweeping the yard before he spoke. "They're coming." Wes's grip tightened on the porch rail. "How many?" "8, maybe 9, Ben said. "Pike's with them. They camped near Dry Creek last night. At the pace they're riding, they'll be here by noon tomorrow." Asha emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her skirt. Her face was calm, but her eyes sharpened at Ben's words. "Then we don't have much time." Ben nodded. "Less than you think. They've been asking questions in town, flashing silver to loosen tongues. Somebody told them about your place." Wes's jaw set. He stepped inside the cabin without a word. On the mantel, the photograph waited. His wife, her smile quick and bright. His boy, squirming in her lap. The frame's glass was cracked from a fall years ago, but he'd never mended it. Some breaks, he'd learned, you carried as they were. He stood there a moment longer, hearing the words his mother used to speak in the old clapboard church. "Love never fails." It came back now, steady as the ticking of the wall clock. 1 Corinthians 13:8. Not as a gentle platitude, but as a vow. Love had failed him once, or so he'd thought. Now he saw it differently. It had brought Asha here, into his care, into his fight. When he came back out, his voice was steady. "We hold them here." Asha's brow furrowed. "Wes?" "No running," he said firmly. "You've done enough of that. We make our stand." Ben crouched by the porch, drawing a rough map in the dust. "We can split them up. Put you here," he tapped the ridgeline, "with your rifle. I'll watch from the mesquite grove. Asha can work the traps you've set." "I'll take the bow," Asha said, already moving toward the cabin. "And the thorns. We can relay some closer to the well, force them to bottleneck." They worked in the heat of the day, each step precise. Wes climbed the ridge to check sight lines, his boots grinding into the sandstone. From up here, he could see the open stretch they'd have to cross, a killing field if the traps worked. Asha's traps were cunning, loops of mesquite thorns anchored where a rider's foot might land, and thin wires strung low to catch at horses' legs. She moved with quick economy, skirt brushing against the dust, dark hair tied back from her face. Ben set a high perch in the grove, half hidden by branches, with a clear shot at the north approach. "If they split, I'll drive them back toward you," he told Wes. As the sun began to dip, they made their last checks. The alarms rattled softly in the breeze, each tin can a sentry waiting for the touch of an intruder. They gathered once more by the porch. No speeches, no false comfort, only the quiet knowledge of what they'd chosen. Wes glanced between Asha and Ben, then out to the darkening ridge. "Tomorrow," he said, "we end this." And for the first time in years, the weight in his chest felt less like grief and more like purpose.
If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The noonday sun hung over Red Mesa like a molten coin, bleaching the canyon walls to bone white and casting no mercy on the land below. Heat shimmered off the packed dirt road that led to Wes Calhoun's ranch gate. Then came the sound, distant at first, a low, rolling thunder that grew until it shook the air. Hooves, many of them. A curtain of dust rolled over the horizon, swallowing the far ridges. Wes stepped onto the porch, rifle slung in his hand, his jaw hard as carved granite. He had been expecting this moment. The dust wall broke, and through it rode Gideon Pike. Even from 50 yards away, Wes saw the man's crooked gait in the saddle, the faint hitch in his right arm, a relic of Abilene, where old blood had already been spilled between them. Pike dismounted with a slow, deliberate motion, his spurs jingling in the dead air. His face was a map of old battles, but his eyes, cold as a snake's in the shade. 8 riders flanked him, their horses stamping nervously under the oppressive heat. Pike's voice carried across the gate, steady as if he owned the air. "Cal Calhoun, we end this now. Hand over the Apache girl and the leather satchel she's carrying." Wes didn't move, didn't blink. The leather strap of his rifle bit into his palm, but his voice came low and unshaken. "You rode a long way for a no, Pike." A tense smile bent the outlaw's lips. "You know what's in that satchel. That map's worth more than the both of you put together. Give her to me, and I'll let you keep your skin." From the shadow of the barn, Asha Altaha stood watching, her dark hair whipped by the dry wind, one hand on the bow slung across her shoulder. Her eyes met Wes's, steady but searching. Was he ready to cross a line he swore never to cross again? Wes took one step forward, boots grinding the dust. "This is my land. She's under my protection. You want her? You'll have to come through me." The air felt thinner, tighter. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Pike's smile faded into something colder, and he nodded once to his men. Saddles creaked, leather shifted, and hands slid toward iron. Wes knew there would be no talking now. The road behind him was gone. In front of him stood the fight that would decide everything. Somewhere deep inside, a verse stirred unbidden. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Psalm 27:1. He squared his shoulders, the sun burning down, and waited for the first move. The first move came not from Wes, but from the ground itself. A faint metallic rattle broke the stillness. Then the sharp clamor of a bell. One of Pike's lead riders had tripped the mesquite thorn wire Asha had strung at dawn. The startled horse reared, neighing in panic as the thorns clawed at its legs. The rider yanked hard on the reins, but the animal danced sideways into another mount, setting off a chain of shouts and curses. Wes didn't waste the opening. He brought the rifle to his shoulder and fired, not at a man, but at the post of the east corral. The wood splintered, sending a puff of dust and grit into the air. The sudden haze blinded Pike's right flank. From her cover near the barn wall, Asha drew, released, her arrow slicing the air to knock the hat clean off a rider's head. The man froze mid-draw, startled as the shaft quivered in the post beside him. Asha didn't aim to kill. Her warning was sharper than any wound. Pike spat into the dust, unimpressed. He signaled with 2 fingers, and his men began to spread, looking for gaps. Wes shifted his stance, eyes cutting toward the high ridge where Ben Merritt was supposed to be lying in wait. The bell rang again, this time on the west fence, and another horse bucked under the sting of mesquite thorns.
The chaos rippled like wind through dry grass. Wes's voice carried over the dust. "You're not walking in here clean, Pike." The outlaw's gaze swept the yard, taking in the shadows and the quiet figures moving in them. He'd expected fear. What he saw instead was a plan already in motion. Asha ducked behind the rain barrel, stringing another arrow. Her breathing was steady, her eyes fixed on the next target. Not a man, but the cinch strap of a rider's saddle. A clean shot later, leather snapped, and the rider tumbled into the dirt with a grunt. Wes felt the tide turn, just slightly. But Pike was no fool. A wounded predator could be the most dangerous kind. The heat shimmered between them, bending the air. From the far ridge, a shadow shifted, Ben's signal. The next step in their defense was ready. Wes's grip tightened. The first trap had worked, but the fight was only beginning. And in the pit of his gut, he knew the hardest part was yet to come. Pike's head tilted, his eyes narrowing against the glare.
He raised 2 fingers, then slashed them sideways through the air, a silent order. 3 riders peeled off from the main group, circling wide toward the east, where the terrain dipped into a dry wash. They meant to come up behind the corral, blindside the defenses. Wes spotted the move instantly. He ducked low and sprinted toward the ridge, his boots throwing up little spurts of dust. The familiar burn in his lungs brought back memories of other hunts, other men, but there was no time for that now. He dropped into position behind a sun-bleached boulder, sighted down the ridge, and fired. Not at the riders, but at a thick, weathered fence post near their path. The bullet split the post, sending the top half crashing into the wash below. The sudden collapse kicked up a choking cloud of dust, blinding the flanking riders. Down in the mesquite grove, Ben Merritt saw his moment. He hauled on the rope he'd hidden in the brush, yanking free the burlap sheet propped against the canyon wall. A rain of jagged rocks tumbled down, the sound echoing like thunder. 2 of the riders swerved away, their horses stumbling against the loose shale. The 3rd rider tried to push through, but his mount balked at the rolling stones. He wheeled around, retreating toward Pike's main group. The flanking maneuver had failed. Pike cursed under his breath, his jaw working like he was chewing glass. "Calhoun!" he shouted over the distance. "You can slow me down, but you can't stop me." Wes rose just enough to let his voice carry. "We'll see about that." From her post near the barn, Asha loosed another arrow, this one punching clean through the brim of Pike's own hat. The outlaw didn't flinch, but his men shifted uneasily. Ben gave a quick hand signal from the grove. North side secure for now. Wes returned a sharp nod. Every trap bought them minutes, but he could feel the clock ticking in his bones. Somewhere beyond the fight, a hawk cried out, circling high above the mesa. To Wes, it sounded like a warning. Pike was pressing harder, and the distance between them was closing. The next clash wouldn't be fought from cover. It would be face to face. The dust between them thinned just enough for Pike to catch Wes's eyes. Whatever history they had in Abilene burned there. Old scores, unfinished and ugly. Pike swung up into the saddle, spurred forward, and his men followed in a surge. Wes left the boulder, boots pounding toward the yard. The distance closed fast, too fast. Pike dismounted mid-charge, hitting the ground with a cat-like thud, and they collided in a storm of fists and grit. The first punch rattled Wes's jaw. The second he caught, twisting Pike's arm until the outlaw's shoulder popped. Pike snarled, driving a knee toward Wes's ribs, but Wes absorbed it, shoving him back into the corral fence. The smell of sweat, dust, and iron filled the air. Abilene all over again. Pike's breath was hot against his ear. "You should have finished me then." "I don't make corpses unless I have to," Wes growled, but his grip didn't loosen. A shout tore across the yard. "Asha!" Wes's head snapped up just in time to see her cornered against the far side of the horse pen. Two riders had flanked her position, one dismounting, rope in hand. Wes shoved Pike aside and sprinted. He hit the ground hard in front of Asha, rifle swinging like a club to knock the rope man backward. The second rider drew a knife, slashing upward, and the blade kissed Wes's forearm, a deep, hot line of pain.
Blood slicked his grip, but he forced the man back with a shoulder slam. Asha seized the moment, planting her boot against the fence post and vaulting clear. She landed light, bow already in hand. Pike had recovered and was moving toward them again, but now Wes stood between him and Asha, blood dripping from his arm into the dust. The pain was nothing. The thought of losing her was worse. For a heartbeat, all sound faded except the rasp of his own breathing. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Pike grinned, circling to find an opening, but the look in Wes's eyes was no longer the gaze of a man avoiding a fight. It was the gaze of a man who had decided exactly where he would make his stand. The fight had splintered into pockets across the yard, shouts, hooves, and the sharp twang of bowstrings mixing with the pounding of blood in Wes's ears. Pike's men were regrouping, pushing in from both sides now. Wes's injured arm throbbed, each heartbeat sending a pulse of pain through the wound. But he kept himself between Asha and the advancing line. They were running out of room, out of traps, and out of time. A rider charged from the west, revolver raised. Wes spun, firing a single round that split the man's stirrup leather. The horse stumbled, throwing its rider hard into the dust. For a second it bought them breathing space, but only a second. Pike closed in again, knife gleaming. His voice was low, almost conversational. "You can't hold me off forever, Calhoun. Hand her over, or you'll both be dead before the sun drops." Behind Wes, Asha's gaze flicked to the leather satchel at her hip, the one she had kept within reach every moment since the day they met. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. "You may lose your cloak, but never lose your soul." Her bowstring creaked as she drew, but her aim wasn't on Pike. With a sharp motion, she slung the bow over her shoulder, gripped the satchel, and stepped out from behind Wes. "Enough!" Her voice cut through the chaos. Pike hesitated, surprise flickering across his face. Asha held the satchel out, her arm steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "Take it. Take what you came for, and leave this place." Wes turned toward her, shock flashing in his eyes. "Asha!" Her glance silenced him. This wasn't surrender, it was sacrifice. Pike's lips curled into a slow smile. He stepped forward, snatching the satchel from her grasp. The weight of it settled in his hand, and greed lit his eyes. "You're smarter than he is," Pike said, jerking his head toward Wes. Then, louder to his men, "We've got what we came for. Mount up." As they began to pull back, the yard seemed to exhale. But Wes knew better. The kind of men Pike led didn't end things clean. Pike swung into the saddle, the satchel resting against his thigh like a prize of war. The sun caught the frayed stitching on its side, glinting for an instant before he wheeled his horse toward the open gate. Halfway out, he reined in, turning just enough for his voice to carry back. "This isn't over, Calhoun. Not by a long shot." Wes stood in the churned dirt, rifle lowered but ready, his eyes locked on Pike. "I'll be here," he said simply. Pike's grin widened, something between promise and threat, before he spurred his horse. His men followed, a ragged line of dust trailing them toward the horizon. The sound of hooves faded, leaving only the whisper of wind through the mesquite. The ranch felt suddenly hollow, like the silence after a storm. Asha stood beside Wes, close enough for her sleeve to brush his injured arm. He barely noticed the sting. Her hand found his, fingers curling with a grip that was steady, deliberate. No words passed between them. None were needed. Ben emerged from the grove, his rifle slung over one shoulder, eyes sweeping the yard for stragglers. "They're gone," he said, though his tone carried no relief. Wes's gaze followed the dust plume until it vanished into the far hills. He knew Pike's kind. Taking the satchel was just the beginning. Somewhere in that leather pouch was a map that could change everything, and Pike wasn't the sort to quit while he was ahead. Asha's eyes lingered on the gate, her face unreadable. She had given up something sacred to spare lives, but the cost hung heavy between them. Wes tightened his grip on her hand, just slightly. "Be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Joshua 1:9. The verse came to him unbidden, settling into the quiet like a vow. The three of them stood in the yard as the light shifted, long shadows stretching across the fence rails. The battle was over, but the war, whatever shape it would take, was only pausing. Above, the hawk still circled, its cry echoing over Red Mesa like a reminder, some fights follow you no matter how far you ride. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The weeks that followed were quieter than Wes Calhoun had dared hope. Red Mesa's winds still swept the canyon each morning, but now they carried the scent of turned soil and crushed sage. Behind the cabin, Asha knelt in the fresh beds they had dug together. Her hands moved with a patience that matched the rhythm of the land, pressing seeds into earth, tucking them under thin blankets of dust. Wes had never seen the little plot before, not in all the years since the fire. It had always been a bare patch of ground he didn't bother with. Now it was the first thing he noticed when he stepped outside. Most mornings he worked on the barn roof. The boards were warped from years of sun, some rotted clean through. He replaced them one by one, the hammer's rhythm steady, almost like a heartbeat. Sometimes Asha would bring him water, her footsteps light on the ladder, her shadow cutting the glare for just a moment. Life wasn't easy, but it was steady, something Wes had almost forgotten how to trust. Jed Merritt rode in one afternoon with the dust of the trail on his coat and the usual edge in his voice. "Town's been talking," he said, tying his reins to the corral. "Some still spit when they hear her name. But others, well, they're saying you did what a man ought to do, stood your ground." Wes met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't do it for their approval." Jed smirked. "Didn't reckon you did." He tipped his hat to Asha before riding off, leaving behind more than just the echo of his words. That night, by the fire, Asha sat with the shadows playing across her face. She held a small leather scrap between her fingers, running her thumb over the stitched edge like it might vanish if she let go. "It's time you knew," she said, her voice low. "The satchel I gave Pike, it carried a map. Not just any map, a marking of my people's sacred land, the kind no one outside the tribe was ever meant to see." Wes didn't speak, letting her words settle. "I could have run," she continued, "could have tried to fight him for it, but if I had, you might have fallen. And She stopped, eyes fixed on the flames. "I wasn't ready to lose you." For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of the fire and the distant call of a nighthawk. Wes reached out, resting his hand over hers, not gripping, just there. "You did what you had to," he said. "That makes it my fight now, too."
Her eyes lifted to his, something unspoken passing between them. Not romance, not yet, but trust, stronger than it had been the day she limped into his life. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of rain from the far canyon. The ground they'd worked together waited, seeds hidden but alive just under the surface. The moon hung full and silver above Red Mesa, washing the canyon in pale light. The wind was low tonight, carrying only the soft creak of the cabin's front porch. Wes sat on the steps, boots planted in the dust, a small bundle of whittled shavings at his feet. In his hands rested the finished carving, a small wooden charm in the shape of a desert star. Asha stepped out, her bare feet silent on the boards. She wore one of Wes's old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the fabric hanging loose over her frame. Her eyes caught the moonlight, glinting like wet obsidian. Wes held out the charm without ceremony. "Figured you ought to have something that lasts," he said. She took it gently, turning it in her palm. "You made this?" "Didn't buy it in town," he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching. She looped the leather cord around her neck, the charm settling just below her collarbone. Her fingers lingered there, as if testing its weight. For a moment they said nothing. The quiet between them was not the uneasy kind from their first days, but the stillness that comes when words aren't needed. Wes looked out over the dark land, where the canyon rim was only a shadow against the stars. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." Matthew 10:39. The verse had come to him earlier in the day, unbidden, while he was mending the barn door. Now it felt like the only way to name what they'd been through, what they'd given up, and what they'd gained. Asha sat beside him, her knee brushing his. "We'll have to go after him," she said quietly. "Pike won't stop, not while he's holding that map." Wes nodded. "We'll go."
But not for revenge. Her gaze searched his. "For justice," he said, "and to keep what's sacred, sacred." The promise hung there, as solid as the land beneath their boots. From the corner of the porch, the lantern swayed in the faint breeze. Its light was not bright, but it was steady, casting a warm circle on the boards, a small defiance against the night. They sat together until the moon drifted west, speaking little, each lost in thought about the road ahead. The danger was still out there, riding under the same sky. But so was something else, an unspoken bond, stronger than the fear. When they finally rose to go inside, Wes left the lantern burning. It would still be there come morning, he thought. Some lights don't go out. And maybe that's the lesson. For Wes, for Asha, and for all of us. That in a land as unforgiving as the frontier, what survives is not just grit, but the quiet acts of care we choose each day. If this journey touched you, share it, and ride with us again for more true Wild West stories where courage, love, and justice still find a place under the endless sky.